If it doesn't go.
Oh. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Doing the Work, the first show on the Back Home Network covering IU women's basketball. This is our 123rd episode recorded on the evening of Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. I'm your host, Kathy Amos, and I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Jeff Marlow. And tonight we will be previewing one of IU's new Big Ten opponents, the UCLA Bruins. But as usual, we will start this show like we do every show, and that's with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And Jeff, I'm going to go a little unconventional here. It's been a slow off season for us. So ironically, I had a little trouble coming up with any banner moments, but I'm going to go with two tonight. And my first one is non-basketball related, but an IU related moment. And that was just a little over a week ago when Lily King, our great swimmer from Indiana, finished up her swimming career in her last Olympics, going out in the 400 medley relay with not just only a gold medal with that relay, but also setting a new world record. So that just capped off just a wonderful career of somebody who has always embraced being a Hoosier and has always shown, fan loyalty and has really held up what it means to be a Hoosier and proven us all very proud. My secondary moment beyond not just Lily King, by the way, there were a ton of actual IU Olympians this year that were in swimming and diving for not just the U.S., but other countries. We had some better play on water polo that played for, I believe, Canada. And we had a track and field person as well for another country. And they all made us very proud that they were Hoosiers in one fashion or another, whether coming into the season or have been Hoosiers of past, they will always be a Hoosier. My secondary banner moment was just for our country in total, which was a proud moment for women's basketball when on just this past Wednesday, our women's basketball team defeated France by 1 to win the gold medal there and really held that string intact again and giving Diana Taurasi in particular her 6th gold medal, which is just crazy to think about. So really a great Olympics overall, great for our Hoosiers, great for women's basketball. So I wanted to kind of highlight both of those for us. And our banner moment tonight is brought to you, as always, by Home Field Apparel, our presenting sponsor of the Back Home Network, who includes the Assembly Call and Crimson Cast and the Dribble and Drive Joe and the X's and Joe's podcast. So we almost need a whole segment just to get all our podcasts out there. So thanks to Home Field for sponsoring all of us. And Home Field is always releasing new schools and updating their products for schools in their existing line. So you're bound to find something for you or anyone in your life that loves great collegiate gear. And as we're gearing up for football season, they have these really cool football packages that you can get. I just got notification my Indiana football boxes got shipped today. So I'm excited to see what how all my stuff turns out. So if you need anything, go out there to homefieldapparel.com and get yourself some great apparel. And if it's your first time, you can use our promo code HOME23 to get 15% off your first order. Again, that promo code is HOME23 for 15% off. The website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. All right. So next we'll jump into a little bit of news. As I mentioned before, it was a bit of a slow time here in the last couple of weeks since Jeff and I last broadcast. So we did have Hoosier Hysteria been said. That will be on Friday, October 18th. And a fun little thing happened, I think, where we had some crossover, if you will, between sports, where Sydney Parrish will be at least coming up tomorrow broadcasting the IU women's soccer game. If you're a Big Ten Plus subscriber, you can turn in to watch the women's play and listen to Sydney do play-by-play. But with that, we are going to kick it over to Jeff and get Marlow's musings. So, Jeff, what's on your mind tonight?
Oh, Kathy, have been a couple of weeks, but really it's been a pretty dull couple of weeks from a news perspective
Yep.
and
Other
things.
than the Olympics.
And yeah, other than the Olympics, and I know it wasn't necessarily a Hoosier, but it was kind of exciting to see. And I forget his name. Was it Hawker? That was the young man from Indianapolis who won like the 1500 or the
Yes,
5,000 meters or something like that. And so kind of
that's
neat
right.
to see a kid that, young man that went to high school in Indiana, win an event like that as well. Of course, Lily is an Indian high school product as well. Yeah, go back to Diana Taurasi real quick. And when I first started coaching on the women's side, the Diana Taurasi was kind of really the first superstar. I had been coaching on the boys side, and Shamika Holtzclaw and some of those in the 90s, but Diana Taurasi was really kind of that first superstar once I had transitioned over coaching girls, that you kind of held up to your players. You kind of would say, hey, watch UConn, watch Diana Taurasi, watch the way she plays. And I think you really can make the argument for Diana Taurasi. Obviously she stuck around for 6 gold medals, talented enough to stick around for 6 gold medals. But I think you can make the argument she may be the single greatest right now. It might be the greatest of all time in the women's game. You look at the stats she's put up, you look at the championships she's won in the WNBA, the championship she won at UConn. She had a fairly successful career overseas as well in terms of winning titles. And then you throw in the Olympics. So, you're kind of seeing the end of a career there as well. Because I doubt, you're not going to see Diana Taurasi in LA in 2028. You're not going to see her probably much longer on the sideline of a WNBA team. So kudos to that. I thought that was a really good game, much closer than I think we all expected. I will say this, and I don't want to sound hypercritical, but I thought both coaches, I wasn't quite sure what the patterns were.
Yep.
I did not understand Sabrina Ionescu being buried on the bench until the third quarter in the gold medal game, but obviously I'm not there, but I just don't know how one of your players who's one of the 5 best in the world, or 7, 8, 6, 7 best in the world is on the bench until
especially with
quarter.
all the turnovers they were having and her passing ability. I couldn't understand why she was on the bench that long either.
And I texted my nephew. We were talking over in a kind of a text. I'm like, right now, is that first half, especially, I made the comment, they're turning it over more than a bad high school team. And
it was awful.
It was like, I would have been going nuts on a high school team for that amount of turnovers. But so not a lot of musings here. Really excited to talk about this UCLA Bruins team tonight. When we started doing the research, I think, first of all, our fans are going to be excited to see them come to Assembly Hall, but this is a legitimate top 5 team. And so let's kind of get into talking about them, and we'll intro them with a little Mackenzie Holmes action here on the tunes.
This was my last game at Assembly Hall. I just really wanted to take it all in. I just want them to know how much I love them. They're the best fans in the country, and I've been so blessed.
All right, cool. Well, great. Well, yeah. So Jeff, we're going to get right into it. So I thought maybe I could talk about the coach here just a little bit with what UCLA has. You can start talking about the history, then we'll get into some team and some individual stats. So with that, UCLA, as Jeff mentioned, is ranked number 5 in the way too early ESPN Charlie Cream rankings. Deservedly so, and you will probably understand why after we kind of get into it. From a coaching perspective, they are coached by Corey Close. He is in his 14th. She is in his, oh my goodness. It has been a long day. She has been in her 14th season at UCLA overall. And in that 14th years, she has accumulated a 287 and 140 record, which is 672. And in the conference, she's been 149 with 81 losses at 648. During this time, she won the WNIT in 2015. She made it to the Elite 8 in 2018. And her teams have had 9 NCAA tournaments, which includes 7 of the last 8. As a person and a player, she played at UC Santa Barbara. In 2023, UCLA lost in the Sweet 16 to South Carolina. And then last year, they lost in the Sweet 16 to LSU. So even though they've made it, they haven't gotten past that Sweet 16. But both of the last 2 years, they really ran into a couple of buzzsaws between South Carolina and LSU. So, Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about the history of UCLA and Indiana?
Yeah, pretty limited history, Kathy. You only have played 3 times prior to this. One of those was all the way back in 1974-75, back in the AIAW days. And I really couldn't find a lot of information about that game. I just know it was at a neutral site.
Probably not. I wasn't even alive yet.
May have even been down in Texas at a neutral site, but UCLA won that game 74-61. And so that was the first time they played. And then they had a brief series toward the end of the last decade. The IU traveled to UCLA in the 18-19 season, December 2nd, 2018, and came away with a 2-point win, 67-65. Ali Patberg had 17 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists, just missing a triple-double. Jalen Penn, blast from the past. Jalen Penn was 17 points and 4 rebounds, and a freshman, Grace Berger, had 5 points off the bench in that win. Then the next year, they came back to, or I should say came back, UCLA then came to Assembly Hall, and what was considered to be a pretty good matchup. And unfortunately, IU shot terribly in the first quarter, fell behind, like, I want to say they got behind like 14 or 15 points at the end of the first quarter and really just couldn't dig themselves out of it. They kind of played even the rest of the way. They end up losing. UCLA got the win 68-58. That game was on December 22nd, 2019. Freshman Mackenzie Holmes had 13 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 blocks off the bench. Allie, 9 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists. Grace, 4 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. As I said, IU shot 35% for the game. The first quarter alone, they were 2 for 16. And so that really set the tone. This coming season, they'll be playing here in Bloomington. And then last year, they had a couple of common opponents. UCLA defeated Princeton and Purdue and Ohio State. In fact, that winning against Ohio State really kind of helped set the tone for them last year.
That was in Columbus.
And then lost to Stanford. And then like IU, they lost to Stanford in the Pac-12 season.
That's right. Yeah. So a little bit of a history there, a little bit of common opponents from last year. I think that Ohio State one in particular was something that really helped propel UCLA into some of the top rankings too. And they beat them, I think, by around 10 points, if I remember. I think it was double digits. I'll look it up here. I got their schedule pulled up. But that was in Columbus. Oh no, almost 77-71. That was in late December, so right before Christmas. But
yeah, Kathy, real quick, I want to mention about, you were talking about Corey Close. Really interesting that this is the only head coaching job she's had. She was an assistant at Florida State, a couple other places before this.
Right.
But she is one of these coaches that has really done. UCLA has a lot of things going for it, but she's done a nice job of really kind of putting her mark. And I'll be excited to watch them because they really are not known for per se a style. She's going to take what she gets and kind of molds that group. And so as we talk about this team, I think you're going to see an exciting UCLA Bruins team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's just jump into some of the numbers and some of the things we know and some of the things we might guess about them coming back next year. I think this will be an interesting kind of switch from our last podcast 2 weeks ago when we talked about Oregon and just the turnover in roster. You'll see UCLA has some new folks coming in, but the core of their folks that when Jeff gets into the players in particular are coming back. And so I think here the team stats are a little more relevant. So I just wanted to kind of set that context for folks. So in terms of their record last year, they did finish 27-7 overall. 13-5 in the conference. So even with 5 conference losses, they were still third in that conference, just to tell you how stacked the Pac-12 was for their last year. They finished behind Stanford, who won, and USC, who came in second. From an offensive perspective, they are average 77.3 points per game, which is around 22nd out of 360 teams. They did manage to score 100 points last year 2 times, and they managed to score 90 points or more 6 of their games. So 8 of their games, they scored 90 or more points. So offensively, they're absolutely no slouch there, which is not surprising, again, once we start looking into some of their personnel. But even with that, on the defensive end, that was really quite impressive too, especially looking at how stacked the Pac-12 is. They held their opponents to 61 points per game margin, which was 89th in the country. That's a 16.2 scoring margin that they had, which was 11th in the country. From a tempo perspective, I wouldn't say that they're overly quick. They average around 71 possessions, which is 120th overall, but definitely above average on the top half in terms of tempo. Offensive rating 13th and defensive rating 9th last year. So again, not just one-sided with in terms of what they do. Shooting, they shot 44.6% from the field and 32% from three and 74% from free throw line. They held their opponents to 36.8% shooting, 32% from three, and they held their opponents to 76 from free throw line. So that was some good free throw defense. So in terms of turnovers, they did average a bit of turnovers, more than what you would kind of expect maybe, but 15 turnovers per game and forced 14.8. So they actually were on the wrong end of that, but not really by much, about even. This is the stat that I was pretty impressed with as well, Jeff, which is the rebounding. They averaged 44 rebounds per game, which is 8th in the country, and they held their opponents to only 29.6 per game, which was 4th in the country. That's a 14 rebound margin over their opponents. That's huge when you're talking about trying to get second chance points and everything else, or keeping your team, if it's defensive rebound, keeping your opponents from getting those second chance points. So they really, I thought that rebounding margin is something I think something we're going to have to keep an eye on as we head into previewing that game against Indiana coming up, or just watching them in general. But Jeff, do you want to kind of jump into some of the individual players? Because like I mentioned, they were pretty stacked last year and they have quite a few people coming back.
Yeah. And real quick, Kathy, just you look at, you talk about tempo. They didn't necessarily, boat race down the floor, but they were efficient. They were still, like you said, they were top third in terms of tempo, but they were efficient. That offensive rating of 13th, the defensive rating of 9th. This is a team, but they didn't force a lot of turnovers. So what that tells me is they packed it. They played probably a version of some type of pack line where they were just going to make everything really difficult for you on that offensive end. And then they controlled the glass. And that was one of the things that I was going to hit on as well with this group is that, when you look at that rebound margin, that's a huge factor, especially in the women's game where sometimes rebounding can be a little bit of a bugaboo, as we've seen with IU at times.
That's right. On the other end of it. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Other side.
So with that, but yeah, talking about the return play, they're stacked. This group is stacked, and then they went out and got some good people in the portal. We're going to talk about their freshman incoming class would have been highly rated. We know, sometimes you don't get
the number one freshman class coming in.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me based on what we're going to talk about. But you look, for example, and I'm not sure that she is per se the best player. She was, the leading scorer, their leading rebounder, but they really are led by two people. And that first one we're going to talk about is Lauren Betts, 6'7" junior center. She was all Pac-12 last year, all Pac-12 defensive team, honorable mention All-American. But she had spent her freshman year at Stanford, and she'd played behind. She was kind of buried on the bench there in Stanford for limited minutes behind Cameron Brink and a couple others. Excuse me. On that front line. So she transferred out. Well, she was the number one ranked recruit in the 22 class that you went and got for last year. So basically, the 22 class, now you're basically bringing that kid in a year later. Colorado native. So she was, kind of a West Coast area, type kid, but she averaged, I'm going to round these a little bit, 15 and 9. She had 1 assist, 2 blocks a game, shot 64% from the field. And she's not just back to the basket player. She's a lot like McKenzie. And from that standpoint of being able to step out a little bit, probably her Achilles heel here right now is she's a 61% free throw shooter. So, it might be somebody you can foul at the end of a game if you need to. The other player that really makes them go is Kiki Rice. She's 5'11" junior guard, all Pac-12, honorable mention All-American. She was the number 2 recruit in the 22 class. And I remember that class a little bit. And by the way, if you get a chance, go listen to Austin Render's Dribble Drive podcast with Dave Marcus, the UCLA play-by-play person, where there was still, there was a lot of debate in that 22 class about which person was 1 and 2, whether it's Betts and Rice and Betts. Well, they got them both now.
It doesn't matter now.
No, they got them both. And so, Rice averaged 13 and 6. She averaged 4.5 assists, 1.4 steals, shot 45% from the field, 31% from 3, 88% at the line. With that, And then you get into London Jones, who did not play a bunch as a freshman, but really jumped into the mix last year. She'll be a 5'4" junior, and she was number 22 ranked kid in 22. So you're kind of seeing a pattern here. Southern Cal native, 12 points, 2 rebounds last year, 2 assists, a steal, 37% overall field goal, but she shot 37% from 3. So a lot of her shots were coming from beyond the arc, 81% at the line. Then you go into Gabby Jaquez, who her older brother had played at UCLA as well, 6-foot junior. She was the number 19 recruit in the 22 class, and she averaged 10 and 6 last year, 2 assists, 48%, 26% 3. So not an outstanding outside shooter, 71% from the free throw line. So there's their core, and they're juniors. They were sophomores last year, Kathy. That's their core. And then their last kind of returner is Angela Dugalik, I believe is how you say her name, 6'4" graduate guard. She missed the 22-23 season due to injury. She played her freshman year at Oregon. When she came out of high school in 2020, she was number 22. She was number 22 recruit in that class, and she averaged 9 and 7 last year, 2 assists, a steal, 36% on field goals, 31% on 3, 73% free throw. So and I'm going to let you get into the transfers, but the core of this team is juniors, and they're really good juniors in terms of what they came out of high school with, their pedigree and what they've put on the floor.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, that's their core coming back, of their top 3 scorers. Only one person's not coming back, and that's Charisma Osborne, who graduated. Lauren Betts and Kiki Rice, as you mentioned, were kind of, and Charisma Osborne was only, she and Kiki in terms of scoring were essentially, the same in there. So, you just to start off and only talk about the fact that they have both Lauren Betts and Kiki Rice, and then they could fill it in with some, maybe some role players here, lower ranked players here and there. That's not what they did. They filled it in with all highly ranked teams or players, excuse me. So their 4 juniors of that core are all ranked 22nd, 19th, 1 and 2 in that incoming class. And they've shown, at least from what I saw of them a little bit last year and looking at their stats and some other things, they've shown that they earned those rankings too, that they didn't just come in and weren't just 5-star rankings either. And then you have, a freshman with Angela Dugilak. I don't expect that she'll probably be one of their starters, but she's probably she's a damn good player to be coming off your bench too. And we haven't even gotten into their transfers or their incoming freshmen. So maybe let's talk a little bit about their transfer in that they have. So I'll just hit them real quick. There's only 2, but again, they kept the core of their main people. So they really didn't need to hit the transfer portal, kind of similar to Indiana. So the first one is Charlize Lager-Walker. She's a 5'10" graduate point guard. She came from Washington State, so she's a Wazoo transfer. She averaged 13.2 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, 5 assists per game, and 1.7 steals. So I'm guessing they picked her up mainly to come in and help with some of that kind of point guard duty. The one thing for Charlize that will be interesting to keep an eye on, especially in the non-conference season, is that she did tear her ACL in January. And so we'll see how fast her recovery is, if she's able to really get up and go in November, or if they ease her back into it. The other transfer in is Tamia Gardner. She's a 6'11". Oh my gosh, where did that come from? 6'3" junior forward. She's an Oregon State transfer. And again, if you want to talk about rankings from that 2022 class, she was number 6 overall. So now they have 3 top 10 players from that 22 class coming in to this team here, coming into the 24 season. In terms of productivity, Tamia scored 11.6 points per game, 7 rebounds. She had 1.5 assists per game. She shot 44% from the field goal line, or field goal, 39% from 3, and she shot 88% from the free throw line. So definitely a gal that can shoot for sure. You want to talk a little bit about their freshmen, Jeff, or you want to touch on the transfers
I'll touch on the transfers first. And again, Gardner, number 6. So they've loaded up again with another highly ranked junior. I agree with you about Lager Walker. It's going to be really interesting to see what she can provide for them coming off the ACL injury coming into this season. And the other thing, we talk about this. So last year, UCLA dealt with some injury issues. They had some players who were injured, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit, that opted out of not coming back this year. They had 3 players retire, not come back for a season for seasons that they still had an eligibility. So last year, Corey Close and Betts missed a handful of games. I think Rice missed a couple. So there were times where Corey Close was dealing with a very limited, roster, and she was able to still put together 27-7. So last year was about kind of juggling minutes to kind of keep people healthy and dealing with injuries and who could you put on the floor at any one time. This year, she's going to run into the issue of, is there enough minutes and are enough basketballs to go around? And I think that will be, again, good coaches figure it out. And I think she will, but that's always going to be the challenge when you put that much highly ranked talent together that, can they all coexist, understanding that there's still going to be somewhat of a hierarchy, which I still imagine is going to basically be Betts and Rice are going to be options 1A and 1B. And then the rest of you got to find your places, your shots off of what they do. But Gardner gives them, a little some more depth. That's the big thing I see with Gardner. Again, she was highly ranked, but her numbers at Oregon State last year were not, eye popping, but on an Oregon State team that was pretty solid. And like you said earlier, Kathy, this was a Pac-12 that was loaded. The Pac-12 on their last season, that may have been one of their best, if not their all-time best season in terms of depth at the overall conference. I mean, you had, the 4 teams we've talked about, USC, UCLA, who are very good. Stanford, who's going to the ACC, that was very, a top level team. Yep. Utah was ranked. Colorado was ranked. Arizona, and it was dangerous. Those were, it was a pretty loaded conference last year. So coming in from Oregon State, she's going to provide something for them. The freshmen coming in, like you said, Kathy, may be the number 1 ranked class in the country. Yep. If not, it's in the top 3. They're going to come in with Kendall Dudley, a 6'2" guard. She was the number 18 recruit, DC native, same high school as Kiki Rice. And then they went at the number 30 recruit in the 2024 class. I hope I pronounced this right. Zania Saka Newman, 6'3" forward, excuse me. Avery Kane, a 6'1" guard, the number 26 recruit in the class. So those are the 3 that they brought in from, the domestic side. Then they went out and got Elena Amasalo, I believe is how you say it, 5'10" guard, but she's been playing with the Finnish national team and has played professionally in Belgium already. And so she's kind of known for that European background, 3-pointing and shooting. So now you've got a loaded core coming back that's already really good. You added a couple key pieces in the portal, and you've got perhaps the number 1 recruiting class in America.
Right. Yeah. Good luck to Corey Close. It's why she's getting paid all of that money, I'm sure, to figure this out. I mean, kudos to her for being able to do that. And I know she is definitely known as a recruiter. And with this class, both in terms of what you're looking at, the core coming back, the transfers coming in, or the incoming freshmen, boy, she knocked it out of the park. So we'll be curious to see her put all of these pieces together, because like you were talking about at the beginning, when we were talking about Coach Close, she is a coach that knows how to kind of put those pieces together. Last year, I think her calling cards seemed to be rebounding, obviously, and defense, and they can put it in the bucket too. So they've got kind of all 3 facets of that game going already last year. And then you bring these in, it'll be interesting to see how the people kind of gel around them. And then when you start looking down the road, and I don't want to look too far down the road, but my goodness, if they keep all of these folks, we haven't talked about one senior other than one of the transfers. Right. So it will be interesting to see if she is able to kind of put those pieces together. They can have a season that they think they can, which I think they can threaten USC for that Big Ten title for sure. Make a deep run in the tournament. Can she keep everyone happy with their playing time to come back the following year? That will be the narrative I think we'll be watching after this season. But, it's paper. A lot of things can happen. They play the games for a reason. You never know what's going to happen. But on paper, they clearly are look pretty dominant to me. And they didn't really lose that much. So I'll just cover that real quick. You kind of started touching on it. There are 3 players that did retire, as Jeff mentioned: Izzy Anstey, Lena Sontak, and Emily Besor. Besor had suffered her second ACL tour, and then Anstey retired for medical reasons as well. They had 2 people that graduated. I mentioned one, Charisma Osborne, and then Cameron Brown. And then they had only 1 transfer out, and that was Christina Iwala. I'm sure I said that name wrong, so I apologize to her. But she went to Ole Miss. But in terms of productivity, she was only averaging 3 points per game and only played around 11 minutes per game. So in terms of minutes to produce or to fill with her leaving, it wasn't much. But they definitely, for the other 5 that they lost, either retirement or graduation, they got their 4 freshmen and their two incoming transfers in that probably on paper are step up from what they probably lost anyway. So overall, Jeff, what kind of, are your thoughts? So you got all these core we talked about, and we talked about some of their results from last year. They did beat USC at one point. They beat Ohio State on the road. The interesting thing too, if you start looking at their schedule from last year, they did some traveling across the country. We already talked about Ohio State, and then some of the other, they went overseas, I believe, over Thanksgiving. I can't remember, was that in the Bahamas? Not sure where they went, but I know they went somewhere overseas over Thanksgiving, and they went somewhere else out on the East Coast as well. So, they're not they're not going to be newbies to traveling across to play some of these games too. So, what other thoughts do you have on them?
Oh, they're loaded, as I've said a couple of times, and I think we all agree. I think you bring up a really good point, Kathy. With the veterans that they have, that junior core, and then you throw in the 4 kids coming back, and then you talk about the 2 transfers coming in. Those are kids, as raucous as Assembly Hall is going to be, as raucous as Iowa is going to be, Ohio State. I don't think they're going to panic going into some of those venues. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win there. All right. I think we can beat them at home, but I don't think you're going to see that deer in the headlight look that you might see from some other teams coming in who don't quite have the veteran experience and the talent. This is a team that has a ton of talent. I will say this also. I wonder how much of last year really affected Corey Close, as far as, again, when you're recruiting high school kids, you're going to get as many as, that you possibly can. I don't know exactly when all those retirements were happening. So maybe she was able to, like the girl from Finland, maybe she was kind of able to nab her after Besor and a couple of the others announced their retirement. Like I said earlier, they dealt with some injuries last year. So maybe Corey Close is figuring, this is women's basketball. As much as we hate to say it, we've dealt with it the last couple of years. Mackenzie having a nagging injury. Yep. Sydney Parrish missed 6-7 games last year. Yeah. Grace Lily missed time. Lily, depth is always going to be key. The more depth you have, the better off you're going to be in the long run. It's just a matter, can you keep them happy when everybody is healthy, as far as what their minutes are and things like that. So as you mentioned, she's got a whole different, issue with, playing time this year than she was dealing with last year. I will say this, and reading a little bit and researching a little bit, I think Besor is one that they wish they could have got back, but I think you can understand why she retired after suffering her second ACL tear. But she was one, I think, that had contributed some. She was, she wasn't a double-digit scorer, but she was playing some minutes and she was putting in production. So I think that would be one that they kind of would have liked to have had back from what she could possibly have done in, this year. But again, you can understand why after tearing your ACL a second time, you might be just willing to be ready to be done. But like you said, Kathy, right now we're not trying to minimize anything that IU has, for the season, but at the top of the scale right now in the Big Ten, you have the two LA teams, USC and UCLA, and on paper, those 2 teams, that's going to be a heck, and they get to play each other twice. Their rivalry is protected, so that's going to be a heck of a 2 games as far as determining the league standings.
Yeah, that's right. So, Jeff, maybe let's talk a little bit about what we do know about their schedules. Schedules have not been released, and we'll kind of give our final thoughts here and wrap up. So we're going to find out about UCLA here pretty quick in November. So they opened their season actually in Paris on November 4th against Louisville. And I believe also in Paris, USC will be playing as well right before that game. So They are going to be hosting South Carolina on November 24th. So getting that, undefeated defending champion on November 24th at home, that's going to probably be a huge game for them. I think we will probably learn a lot about UCLA in there. You already mentioned USC. They'll be playing them twice. In terms of other Big Ten games, they will be hosting Ohio State, Illinois, and Nebraska, and they will be traveling to Iowa, Maryland, and as aforementioned, they will be coming to Assembly Hall. So, Jeff, overall, for me, I'll give my quick final thoughts on here. I think we've kind of said it already, and then I'll give it to you, and we can wrap this up. I think because to me, UCLA and USC, like you'd mentioned, they're the cream of the crop right now, at least on paper. So, injuries withstanding, I fully expect that this is going to be a battle between those two teams. But I think we'll know real fast, like I mentioned, when they play South Carolina and host them, if they're really going to be for real. And we'll find out about South Carolina too. That's going to be really one of the huge non-conference marquee games, I think, in November for everyone to kind of watch for. They have so much talent coming back and so much talent coming in, and playing off of what they already accomplished last year as the team. I think that there's, easily Final Four potential in this team on paper from what I can see. So I think they're not anybody to be taken lightly. I'm glad we have them at home, but I think this is a game we will look forward to. And as we preview them, we're going to be really missing Mackenzie Holmes and being able to have somebody down low to really be able to help with Lauren Betts. I think that's going to be a matchup that for us is just going to be a little bit too much to overcome. But what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think you're going to find out a lot about them in Paris. I think you'll find we're not really talking about it. I think we'll find out a little bit about Louisville too, as they go and play a top 5 team in UCLA. That South Carolina matchup, I think, will tell us quite a bit about both teams as well. I think you're right, Kathy. I think this is they may not say it outwardly, but if you're inside that program, the thinking there is Final Four or bust. Their season is going to be deemed a success by if they get to a Final Four, as long as everything on paper runs, the chalk runs. They don't suffer couple devastating injuries. Yeah. They don't get that, that upset. But I think right now their mindset is a Final Four this year, or it's really going to be kind of hate to say unsuccessful season, but we all been there. We all know in coaching and team sports that, you can be 29-2, but if you don't get to the Final Four, it's going to feel like a disappointment. And I think that's kind of where they're at with this group right now. I think the schedule favors them a little bit. I didn't look at USC's schedule too much, but obviously they play, those two play home and home. But to get Ohio State, Illinois, Nebraska, who we think are going to be 3 of the other top teams in the league at home. Maryland, we're not quite as sure about. We're going to preview some of these teams coming up in September, the traditional teams. Iowa, a lot of questions about Iowa. They reloaded with some kids, but new coach, don't have Caitlin Clark, don't have Gabby Marshall, don't have Kate Martin. So to be traveling to those teams, and then IU, who we think is going to be pretty decent, but what do we, and what's the post situation going to look like behind Lily, in terms of is Stripling going to be, can Stripling play that role and be somebody who could give Betts problems? So we'll find out as we get deeper into the season. But yeah, as I started really digging into the research on this over the last week or so, week and a half, I was kind of like, wow. Especially I started looking at those rankings. I was like, whoa. I remember
excited to be able to watch them play more. Since now they're in the Big Ten, I'm really excited to be able to get to see more of their games.
Even though I had some access to Pac-12 games on ESPN, I didn't have Pac-12 network, so I didn't see them all that often. Along with USC, if they weren't playing a nationally game or an ESPN televised game, I didn't see them. So, from that standpoint. So I think this is going to be a fun team for IU fans to get to watch and come in. And I think you can get in, and I think this is a game that can kind of become a little bit of a rivalry game. I really do. I think IU, UCLA, let's build this to a little bit and see if we can make it into a nice, fun rivalry. So that's my final thoughts.
Cool. Yeah, my only last thing is for our listeners, I'd really encourage you to make sure you watch UCLA games this year, not just the one that we play against them. I think you're going to see a really fun team. You're going to see a lot of great basketball. So don't waste it on some other games. Maybe if you have to pick between games, I would definitely circle and see UCLA as a team to watch. So now that's officially my final thought. All right. So we'll wrap it up here with talking about what is up next for the show. So our next show is going to be on August 28th, again in 2 weeks from today. This time we're going to turn our eyes to the other LAT coming in, which is the USC Trojans. So I think that will also be another fun team to really delve into. I think everyone is also going to enjoy both, hopefully listening to what we can find out about them and then watching them next year. And if you do want to see us do the show live and be part of our live chat, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is youtube.com/Backhome Network. You can also be part of our private community. You can find out more about that at assemblycall.substack.com. A special thanks to John Rigger of Riggs Design and to Jared Morris from Assembly Call for some of the music that you heard throughout our episode. I'm sorry, John Rigger for our designs and Bob Thomas and Jared Morris for our logos. Oh my gosh.
Songs.
Songs. Yes. But did I mention I was just an incredibly long day today? So let me try again. Thanks, John Ringer of Riggs Design, for designing our logos. And thank you, Bob Thompson and Jared Morris, for the music that you heard throughout our broadcast. But most of all, thank you all out there for listening, whether you're listening live or any of your podcast feed of note later on. We really enjoy having you here. We love talking hoops, and we will be back to do that one more time with you in 2 weeks. But until then, keep your elbow in and your eye on the rim, and let's go Hoosiers. Whew.
All right.
I stumbled my way through that one today. No, we have a bunch of people are in town for work. So we just have a ton of meetings, and I had meetings from like 8 until 4:30 almost today with very little breaks. So my brain's a little mushy after all of that, absorbing a lot of stuff and already talking quite a bit today. So apologies for all of my stumbles, but we made it through. But yeah, UCLA, they're going to be a ton of fun to watch. They were fun to watch last year, and they got a huge course. So it's going to be a good time. So.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's going to be fun. It'll be fun. You know, we don't go out there this year, but I think the year after it'll be fun to go out there and play a game. And we won't have to worry, at least with UCLA and USC this year, we don't have to worry about trying to figure out when we're doing the post game.
That's right. That's right. Maybe we should just go out to those games in 2 years from now. We'll make it a vacation.
And do the post game live from after the game. Yeah.
So probably play them back to back and just stay out there. So we might as well make a vacation of it.
Get some press credentials and get some press credentials. So.
All right. Well, that's that. I think my dogs are telling me it's time to go.
Yeah. Early, my dogs are going. So Kathy, enjoy. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
You too. All right.
Bye,
good night,
everybody.
everybody. Bye-bye.